Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We just wrapped up an amazing week 7 of college football. It's Monday. That means the college football stock market is officially open. So let's dive into this week's picks on who I'm buying, selling, and putting a hold on. All right, so let's go ahead. We'll start off by looking at who I was buying, selling, and holding on last week. I bought into Oklahoma after their win on Texas. They had a bye this past week. I bought in NC State. I didn't think they were going to go out and beat Duke. I just want to say that, but I still think that their offense looked more impressive than what they had in the past. They moved the ball pretty well against Duke. Duke just has a very good red zone defense. They don't let a lot of points, and that's what we saw with NC State. I still think NC State's going to be fine going forward. I bought into Wisconsin. Might have overbought. Tanner Mordecai did get hurt in that game, so that didn't help. I still have high hopes for Wisconsin going forward. We'll have to wait and see what happens with Mordecai. Looking at Nebraska, they had to buy this past week. I still believe, and even watching Maryland struggle this past week with Illinois, and they lost. And with Wisconsin's future uncertain with Mordecai, who knows if Nebraska can pick up a few more wins? But their next 3 weeks are going to be key in them getting into position to make a bowl game this season. And then I bought into Louisville, and Louisville goes on the road and they lose in just ugly fashion to Pitt. They didn't look good the entire game. Pitt looked pretty solid for the first time all season. Teams I sold on were Miami and TCU. Uh, I was selling on Miami. They lost by 10 to UNC this past week, and now they have Clemson coming to Miami this week. And then I sold on TCU. This is the other one. You know, obviously we're not fortune tellers here. TCU played amazing this past weekend against BYU. I thought it was, there's a lot of uncertainty around TCU and if they can make a bowl game. That win this past week definitely helps a lot for their case. But we shall wait and see going forward from here. And then the two teams that held on, Wyoming and Rutgers. Wyoming goes on the road and loses by 7 to Air Force. Still a very good game. Wyoming is still a very good team. But I think Air Force is in another class. They showed that. But Wyoming did cover. And I still think this is a very good team going forward. We might even see a rematch between those two at the end of the season. We shall wait and see. And I put a hold on Rutgers, and Rutgers went out and looked like they might lose to Michigan State. Huge fourth quarter comeback. They looked like a completely different team in that fourth quarter. Stealing the kickoff basically out of the returner's hands was something I don't think I've ever seen before. But Rutgers did it, and then they get a huge win. Still a very rough road ahead for them, but they need one more win to lock in bowl eligibility for the season. So let's go ahead. Let's dive into the teams I'm making my positions on this week. First up, we're going to buy Iowa State. Really impressed with their record here the last couple weeks. They've won 3 out of their last 4, as you can see, and that one loss is on the road at number 14, Oklahoma, where they looked pretty good the first, I would say, quarter and a half, and then Oklahoma really pulled away from there. But I really like how Iowa State has won or had looked in their other games. 3 pretty good wins here at home against Oklahoma State, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then home against TCU, and they just dismantled TCU for 4 quarters. After watching that game, that's when I was like, wow, TCU is really not good this year. And then they just won this past weekend at Cincinnati by 20 points. This team is clicking on cylinders, and coming out of week 3, I thought this team was dead in the water. I didn't think they were making a bowl game. I thought Matt Campbell was getting fired. I did not have any high hopes for this team at all. And now here they are. They're sitting at 4-3. They just need 2 more wins and they can make a bowl game. And looking at their upcoming games, they're at Baylor. It's very winnable for them. Home against Kansas. I think that's a toss-up game. Kansas coming off a rough week at Oklahoma State. But I still think they're a very good team. They just need to be healthy, and that was their problem. You saw with them last year. We're seeing it again this year. Looking at BYU, they're on the road. We just saw BYU get dismantled by a TCU team that Iowa State beat. So that another very winnable game. And then they have number 8 Texas at home. I'm not saying Iowa State's going to upset them, but I think Texas might overlook them. And we've seen Iowa State in the past have a tendency to ruin really good team season. Teams that have a chance at the playoff, and I always think of 2007 Oklahoma State, who they just needed to beat Iowa State. They're going to the national championship game, and Iowa State upsets them. I think it was double overtime. So whenever I think of Iowa State and ruining people's seasons, I think of that game. So who knows what's going to happen on the stretch? But I absolutely see a path forward for Iowa State to make a bowl game. Much better expectations for them now than what I had for them just a few weeks ago. So great job, Iowa State, these past couple weeks. Next team we're going to look at is I'm going to put a hold on Arizona. I think Arizona is a very good football team. I'm really impressed with what they've done the last 2 weeks. They played USC close, went to, triple overtime in that game. Then they go on the road and they beat number 19 Washington State. They don't just beat them; they pulverize them. 44-6. They shut down Washington State's high-powered offense. We've seen that the last 2 weeks now. UCLA did it, and now Arizona goes on the road and does it. A lot of questions around what's going on with Washington State. But a huge win for Arizona. Now they sit at 4-3. They need another team. Just needs 2 wins going forward to get to a bowl game. Their first since I think 2017, 2018, which is huge for them. But they've looked very good. They only lost to Washington by 7 at home. That was another very good game. Now, the reason I'm putting a hold on buying into their hype, is I'm not saying they won't get to that bowl game, but they do have a very grueling schedule ahead, which we've seen that the Pac-12 every year just turns into a meat grinder. It chews up and spits these teams out. And that's why they always struggle to get somebody to go to the playoff. But you look at their upcoming schedule, they're home against Oregon State and UCLA, 2 very good teams on both sides of the ball. Then they're at Colorado, a team coming off a brutal loss, up 29 nothing. We'll talk about them a little bit later. And then home against Utah. And then after that, they play Arizona State. So again, they just need 2 wins to make a bowl. I think out of Colorado and Arizona State, they can get those wins. But the reason again, Arizona is a very good team. They've been playing very good football the past couple weeks. I d At some point, this grueling schedule that they're gonna play 5 consecutive ranked teams. I'm glad they got a huge win at Washington State, but I think Oregon State and UCLA are completely different teams. Oregon State has really improved a lot since losing that game to Washington State. And UCLA, we just saw, a couple weeks ago, beat Washington State, and then they had a pretty decent game against Oregon State, but Oregon State was able to expose a lot of holes in UCLA's defense. So just my reason for putting hold on Arizona is just looking at the schedule upcoming. It's got to be grueling, but not a team that can't do it. But I do have a lot of questions still about this team, and that's why I'm putting a hold there. Staying in the Pac-12, I'm going to sell on USC. We knew the issues with this team. We knew their defense wasn't very good. We thought their offense was fine though, and then they go on the road to Notre Dame, and we knew this was the best defense USC had played to this point. We knew that it would probably be a close game because that's how Notre Dame likes to play, these big time games. They just dismantled USC on all 3 sides of the ball. And I say 3 because special teams were atrocious for South or USC. Um, Notre Dame has a kick return for a touchdown, which, they also had a scoop and score, the kick return, so that's 14 points off the board. They won by 28, so you're talking about a 2 touchdown game, and then Caleb Williams throws 3 interceptions, gave Notre Dame short field 3 times. It wasn't like they were driving and then he threw an interception. I think 2 of them were, on the USC side of the 50. So just an ugly game all around from USC, and now you look ahead, and again, this Pac-12 schedule, we see it every year. It does not get easy for USC. They have Utah coming to town. Now Utah's most likely still without Cam Rising. We know how bad he's hurt, but we don't know when, if ever, he's coming back this season. Then they're on the road at Cal, and then they have Washington coming to town, and then they're at Oregon. So they have one of the most brutal schedules in the Pac-12 coming up. And just watching how they played this, now I'm not saying they can't respond, but I think the playoffs are all but out of reach for them. I don't see them making it through these next 4 games without 1 loss. They also have UCLA obviously down the road. So, I think USC's hopes for a playoff are all but shot, and it's really hard to, even if you come back and say, "Hey, we're a one-loss Pac-12 champion," look at who we beat. A lot of people are still gonna look at this Notre Dame game. Like, you lost to a 2-loss team by 28 points on the road. Like, and at the same time too, I think this v Heisman voters were already gonna have, voter fatigue from seeing Caleb Williams do all that, magical crap last year, goes into this season. He's doing the same things. Caleb Williams is a fantastic quarterback. Obviously, he made a lot of mistakes on Saturday, but you're gonna have games like that. It's just human. Um, but I think this past game is gonna be enough for those voters to look at and be like, "All right, he's not our guy this year," and especially with how Penix and I think with Penix winning the game, he has a slight nod above Bo Nix, but both quarterbacks looked amazing in that game, as compared to what Caleb Williams did on Saturday. I think that game enough is gonna be enough for voters to point at, look and say, "This is why we didn't go with Caleb Williams this season." Next team I'm gonna look at is I'm gonna buy into Oklahoma State. I told you I'd come back to them. They had a rough start to the year. They were sitting there at 2-2. They just got blown out by South Alabama, 33-7, and then they go on the road and they lose by 7 to Iowa State. And it looks like maybe the wheels are going to start falling off for Oklahoma State. Maybe this is the end of Mike Gundy. Obviously, a lot of fans and stuff for Oklahoma State were already talking, very upset with him. Then they have Kansas State come to town and they beat Kansas State 29-21. It was a very good game for Oklahoma State on both sides of the ball. They looked impressive for all 4 quarters. And then this week, they have Kansas coming to town. Kansas is, they came off that Texas loss. They whooped up on UCF. That they need to continue playing good to not just stay in the rankings, but continue to climb up them. And Oklahoma State just took it to them. And again, obviously with injuries and stuff that hurts Kansas, but still, Oklahoma State could have called it quits, could have packed it in for the season. And now this is looks like a reborn team. They look very good the past couple weeks, and their schedule coming up. You know, not the worst in the world. They're at West Virginia, who's coming off a brutal loss of their own. Looks like they had the game won at Houston. Quarterback runs his mouth, gets a 15-yard penalty. Houston gets in range, and they throw up a Hail Mary. They win the game. Then they're at Cincinnati, who's really struggled in their first year in the Big 12. Uh, excuse me, they're home against Cincinnati. Then they're home against Oklahoma. Oklahoma, we know, is a very good football team, but this is a huge rivalry game. It's the last time Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are going to play for the foreseeable future. This game is going to have a lot of emotion behind it, and even the worst Oklahoma State team could play very well in this rivalry game. We see that across the board in these big time rivalry games. It doesn't matter how good or bad the two teams are. Whenever they play, the hatred just brings out that extra level, and they almost always turn into very good football games. So Oklahoma State is not out of the woods by any means when it comes to that game. And then they're at UCF, another team that is, they've looked so good to start the season, and now the past couple weeks, ever since they got into Big 12 play, they've really struggled blowing that lead at Baylor. As I said, a few weeks ago, I sold on UCF. Blowing that lead at Baylor or against Baylor really hurt. Then they got steamrolled by Kansas. This week they have to go to Oklahoma. It's just been a rough start to the Big 12 schedule for UCF. So Oklahoma State has a pretty favorable schedule upcoming, and a team where we thought, again, maybe they missed the bowl game this season, maybe their head coach gets fired, and now all of a sudden we're looking at them after week 7. It's like, oh hey, team looks, all right. And like, obviously not where they wanted to be coming into the year, not really in contention for the Big 12 yet. Although, I mean, they have one loss. Who knows what happens going down the road, especially if they're able to upset somebody like Oklahoma. Who knows what happens at the end of the year. The other thing I'll say about that Oklahoma game being in Stillwater, Oklahoma State's beaten their last 6, or they have some kind of streak. I forget the exact number of beating top 25 opponents at home now. So something to keep your eye on when Oklahoma comes to town in a few weeks. But Oklahoma State, obviously not where they wanted to be coming into the year, but much better than where they were just 3 weeks ago. So shout out to Oklahoma State, and I'm looking forward to them to continue to improve. Next team I'm going to put a hold on here is Toledo. They're sitting at 6-1. That one loss is on the road to Illinois. That was on the last second field goal. They've looked pretty good since. My two concerns lying for Toledo is one, their upcoming game this weekend is at Miami, Ohio, another MAC team that has looked very impressive, but also looking back at some of these games that they just completed uh, versus Western Michigan, versus Northern Illinois, and then at Ball State. 3 teams that are not the greatest, especially looking at Western Michigan and Ball State. Northern Illinois has really turned it on since they got into MAC play. They've blown out their last 2 opponents now, I think. But just looking at that point in time where the 2 teams sat, and just looking at the rosters alone, Toledo, I think, is a much better team than what Northern Illinois is. Coming off the MAC championship last year, they looked very solid in a lot of their games this year. That's a 2-point victory for them at home. Then they go to Ball State this past week. Ball State is another very not great team in the MAC, and they only win that game by 7. Western Michigan, was a little bit wider of a margin, but they didn't cover the spread in that game. And so Toledo's playing a lot of really close games here, and now they have to go on the road to a very good Miami, Ohio team. This could be a team that trips up Toledo. And then looking at that schedule ahead too, are teams that you can't afford to play close. That if I'm especially looking at that Eastern Michigan game. This is the game we thought that the MAC West would really come down to. Obviously, Eastern Michigan didn't get off to the greatest start. I sold on them a couple weeks ago, and they've really improved since. But um, the more tight games that you play like this, the more that you're going to start to flip them and lose them rather than win these close games. And that's always a concern. And so that for that reason, I'm going to put a hold on buying into Toledo more. Obviously, MAC title contenders for sure. I'm not saying I'm selling off on that. But the close games and then the upcoming opponents kind of give me a little hesitation. So for that reason, I'm not selling off, but I don't want to buy into believing in Toledo any more than I already am right now. So that's why I'm putting the hold on them. Next team we're going to look at is the Wake Forest. I'm going to sell on Wake Forest. Coming into the season, we knew they were missing, obviously Sam Hartman was a huge piece to lose. But they started off the season 3-0. And it was, hey, this team is still pretty decent. Um, and they have a shot at making a bowl game. And then they have Georgia Tech come to town and they get stomped by them 30-16. They go on the road to Clemson. They really hung around with Clemson. Gave Clemson a fight for all 4 quarters. They lose that game by 5. So okay, hey, Wake Forest is fine. They shook off that Georgia Tech loss. Still going to be a good team. Then they go on the road to Virginia Tech and just get dismantled by Virginia Tech 30-13. Great game for Virginia Tech, by the way. I thought about putting them in the buy sell. I think I'm going to wait another week. Let me get another game, and I'll really get a great feel for how I'm looking at Virginia Tech right now. But they're definitely trending upwards. Um, and Wake so Wake Forest is now right after winning 3 straight, they've lost 3 straight. They need to find 3 wins somewhere in the 6 games ahead, to steal a victory or to steal victories and get into the bowl games. I don't see that with their upcoming schedule. If you look here, they have Pitt at home this weekend. I think with the way that Pitt played last weekend and how Wake has played the last couple weeks, I think that's suddenly become a toss-up game. Then they're home against Florida State. With all due respect, Wake, I don't think they have a shot in that game, and then they're at Duke. Again, I don't really see them having a shot in that game. And then they're home against NC State. It right there, you could possibly look at them going 0-4 in those games. And if they lose 4 more games, they're out of the bowl. They're gonna best they can do is 5-7 at that point. And the way NC State has really kind of turned things around on offense. Obviously, again, they just struggled this past week against Duke. Uh, but I still think this is a good NC State team moving forward. Better than what I've seen Wake Forest play the past couple weeks. And so for that reason, I'm going to sell off on Wake Forest. I do think they miss out on a bowl game this season, but there's a slight possibility they can, flip maybe NC State and get a win. But they need to win this game against Pitt at home this weekend. That is a huge must for them. If they lose that game, I think they're 100% out of a bowl. Um, and so this is a must-win game this weekend at home against Pitt. Next team I'm going to look at buying is Liberty. Really impressed with how they started the season. They've gone through some tougher opponents, and they're sitting here at 6-0. I'm really looking at that Jacksonville State game this past weekend. Jacksonville State has been a very good team. Their first year in the FBS. Liberty goes on the road there and beats them pretty handily, 31-13. FIU also had a pretty good start to the year. They go down and beat them 38-6. Sam Houston's the one team that really gave them trouble. Sam Houston has yet to win a game, but Sam Houston has also covered every single spread so far this season. They've made all of these games really tight. They're just waiting on that first breakthrough. And looking ahead at Liberty, their toughest test that lies ahead for them is on the road at Western Kentucky. If they can somehow sneak through that game, I absolutely can see Liberty going undefeated this season. And then you're talking about they're undefeated. They're obviously right now ranked below what Air Force is. Air Force doesn't have the easiest schedule ahead either. Liberty has a shot at being the Group of Five representative in the New Year's Six Bowl, especially with Wyoming just getting another loss this past weekend. I think Liberty should absolutely be in that discussion to be the New Year's Six Group of Five representative. But I'm really impressed with how they played so far, and especially this past week on the road at Jacksonville State, who's been a very good team um, to this point. I think going forward as well. but beating them pretty handily 31-13. Liberty's looked very good. And a lot of people were questioning, they just lose Hugh Freeze. And there's a lot of questions around this team, and they've answered the bell, and they've looked really impressive to get to that 6-0 mark. Next team, the last team we're going to talk about is Colorado, and I'm going to sell on Colorado. Um, I I felt like I tempered expectations. I didn't, obviously have them going to the playoff or winning the Pac-12 or anything like that. But I was really impressed with their start to the season. They got to 3-0. Um, I knew their upcoming stretch would be difficult for them at Oregon and then home against USC. They do drop both of those games. The USC game, they had a very impressive second half. They had a nice comeback. They just fall short. Um, and then they go on the road and they beat Arizona State, a very tight game, but nonetheless, they pull out a victory, and that was huge for them. And then this week, they have Stanford at home. They looked impressive in the first half. They're up 29 nothing. Looks like they're about to go to 5-2, and then they just got to find somewhere down the line to squeeze out a win, which I thought was possible. And then they blow that lead, and they drop the game 46-43 in double overtime. Um, the time management was really poor in the second half. Also, going for it on fourth down in your own end multiple times in the second half was really questionable, and that's what really made everything easier for Stanford to make that comeback is having a much shorter field to have to control. Um, but just the collapse on all aspects of the game for Colorado. Um, this is and I talked about this with UCF when they blew a 35 nothing lead, to Baylor a couple weeks ago. A loss like this does things to you mentally where it's very difficult to recover from going forward. And then again, looking at this upcoming schedule, it doesn't make things easy for you. You're at at UCLA, home against Oregon State, home against Arizona, who we just talked about has been a very good football team. And then they're at Washington State, who while they're having their problems, after watching Colorado this past week, I could easily see Colorado dropping their next 4 games. Now, it's not time for people to act like the sky is falling again. Some of the people that overbought the hype on Colorado are kind of seeing this realization, but at the end of the day, going from a 1-11 team to a 5-7 team is a great improvement. Dion is still implementing his team, his culture, um, and this is the kind of season where I feel like a lot of these players needed a wake up call like, hey, we are some of the best players in the country, but there's a lot of things that we still need to work on, still need to fix going forward to get us to that level where we are winning conference championships, we're in competition for the playoffs, so on and so forth. Um, so still impressed with Colorado's turnaround, but still a long way to go. And I think this past week made that very evident. So that'll do it for the college football stock market post week 7. Let me know what you guys think. What teams do you want to see me talk about? Make sure you drop a comment and say what team, and I'll make sure I get to them. Um, but other than that, we can't thank you guys enough for your support. We are cruising past 100 subscribers. We hit it last week, and it seems like every time I check it, we're up a couple more. So again, thank you all so much for your support. We really appreciate it. We will be back tomorrow to do the College Football Weekly Awards, and then Thursday, Blitz Boys will drop. Friday night, Slade and I will be live streaming a watch along for the SMU in Temple game. We're going to be doing another Swear Jar Sweat. The Wheel of Destiny has spoken, and we'll be talking, or the bet we're placing on that is the under 57.5 total. So I think that's going to be a real sweat this week. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll also be talking college football. We'll have some guests stop by. So make sure you guys come over there and check that out. We'd really appreciate it. And then, of course, Saturday morning, we'll have Out of the Tunnel live to get you ready for week 8. It's going to be another fun week. We have Penn State, Ohio State to talk about, Duke, Florida State. It's a loaded schedule. And this is the best part about this time of year is every week, the matchups mean a little bit more and more and more, as we go into the rest of the season. And that's what makes college football so awesome. So we're excited to talk about week 8 and get you ready and continue making great content for you guys. So make sure you drop a like and a subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video.